Looking to buy a router table? Don't make the same mistakes I made. The first router table I bought was many years ago, before I really knew much about routers and what to look for. It was a Ryobi router table that I bought from a pawn shop. They actually included a rigid router. I don't remember the price, but I'm sure I got it for pretty cheap, because that's kind of how I roll. After using the router a few times, I noticed a few pretty significant problems. First, the router fence wasn't straight. Second, the router table wasn't flat. Those are some pretty big problems when it comes to router tables. So I ended up getting rid of that Ryobi table. The next router table I bought was this Porter cable table. It rhymes, what do you know? One of the disadvantages of the Porter cable table as compared to the Ryobi table that I had before, the Ryobi table was wider. And so it would give more support for the workpiece as you're working through. One advantage of the Porter cable table over the Ryobi is that it's much flatter, but it's also not smooth. So you've got these various lines in here, so that can mark up your workpiece. I'm not a big fan of the design of this guard. It's pretty clunky, and if I need to adjust anything, I try to move it out of the way, and it just plops back down. Not the best. The other issue with the fence is that there's the large gap here between the two sides. To help bridge that gap, I made this out of MDF, and that gives me more support for the workpiece as it's going past the bit, and still allows for dust collection. But you'll see the dust collection port is way back here, and there's this big gap. Suction is coming from here as well as from here. It's just not as good dust collection as I'd like. Let me tell you about the throat plate. This is the throat plate that came with the machine. It doesn't have a very wide opening. And so larger bits, like this lockmiter bit from CMT, can't really be used with this. So to remedy that, I made my own throat plates. This guy is just big enough to fit the bigger bits through. Cut that with a 2-inch Forstner bit. I use this Centec vacuum hose setup, which makes it really easy to clip in and out of the various tools that I'm connecting to the vacuum. This port won't clip in, so I have to use some adjustments. All right, so this clips in pretty easily, but then I have to connect this guy in here, which means, oh, sorry to take you around, which means I've got to move my pencils out of the way, just so I can get room to stick that guy in. And you'll notice how much space this takes up just to get the dust collection going. The Porter cable table, even though it's more reliable than my old Ryobi table, it still has issues. So where can I find a router table for cheap that overcomes these problems? Well, I had to make it. This router table design was inspired heavily by Stumpy Nubs, and I'll post the inspiring video that he had for portable router tables in the description below. There are a few differences to this table versus what Stumpy made. First off, the router table that he made was just 1 foot squared, not 1 inch. That would be a very portable router table, but probably not that useful. So 1 foot by 1 foot. This is 2 feet by 2 feet. I'm using the same or very similar fence design that he came up with. I've just made it out of a very flat MDF. My fence is also MDF, so I'm not worried about a bowing table like with the Ryobi. It's smooth, and so I'm not worried about marring my workpieces like with the Porter cable. This can natively support larger bits, as you can see with this multi-roundover bit that's pretty good sized, but still comes through just fine. I also really like the dust collection on this. It works a lot better than the Porter cable setup. I don't remember how Stumpy Nubs did his dust collection port, but I think it was similar to this. Basically, I just have some dados cut into these backing supports. So this just slides out. It's just some 1/8 inch Baltic birch. And then I've cut that in half. So that comes up. And then I can take my Centec hose, plop it in right there, and I've got it positioned high enough and far enough back from the fence that it's not going to be damaged by the router bit. And then I just put that guy over the top, push him down nice and secure, and then push this guy in and lock it into place. So now the hose isn't going to move around, so it doesn't accidentally go and hit the router bit while we're operating. This lower portion is glued in, and everything else is tight enough that there's very little suction loss. Pretty much all of the suction is being concentrated in this little hole on the opposite side. Now, I might have made that hole a little too small. I just used a 2-inch Forstner bit to do that, but it's all there. The fence is 1.5 inches wider than the table, and so then I've got 1/2 inch, so then I've got 1/4 inch MDF on the sides as functioning as the runner. So then anywhere I go on this board, I'm square. Now, if I ever want to do something at an angle, this won't work, so I'll have to come up with a different solution for that. But I think most of the time I'm going to want to cut something square. Now, Stumpy's design, in addition to being a lot smaller, also did not anticipate being mounted onto a cabinet like this. It is portable, but not in the way that I think he was intending. Let me give you a little demonstration how it works. Lock in the position. We'll just profile this guy, some old deck scrap, and I'll turn on the vacuum and then turn on the router. I think that worked pretty well, and there's basically no dust to speak of. There's a little bit down below the router in the cabinet, but you know what? That's not too shabby. I can handle that. Now, while this is a huge upgrade from what I've had in the past, it's still not perfect. So one of the things that I'd really like to do is a lift system, so I don't have to get down into the cabinet in order to adjust the height. And I'd also like to be able to change the bit from above the table instead of having to remove the router from down below. So if you have any ideas on the best way for me to do that, why don't you throw that in the comment section? And then make sure you subscribe so that you can see how I put those ideas into action